Hello again, everybody. It's Scott Casper, Takedown Wrestling. Today, our Nike Wrestling Hot Seat travels to Burnt Hills, New York. Our guest today is Lori Blatnick. Lori, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good. Thanks for taking the time. I know it was a conversation that you and I had last week as to whether or not you even wanted to talk about your late husband Jeff's coming induction into the UFC Hall of Fame, because you said at the time you really didn't know that much about it. It was a part of his life that he just didn't bring home.
Well, it's not that he didn't bring it home. He did, but maybe I didn't ask, hey, what are you doing? I knew what he was doing, and we had two kids at the time because that was back in the 90s, and they were both toddlers, and I was a stay-at-home mom. So I spent all my time with my kids, and he would go on his business trips or go on the trip to UFC or whatever, and I'd say, see ya, have a great trip, and I never watched it or anything, so from that aspect, I guess I didn't know that much about it until after he died and found out a whole wealth of information.
Jeff Blatnick, of course, a lovable Greco star. He won gold at the '84 Olympic Games, which is something that had never been done before. Diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. Seems like he was battling something for quite a bit of his life. Always challenged, but you were there by his side. Great kids. He always spoke in glowing terms of you. Now the world of mixed martial arts, of which he was at the very dawn of. Jeff Blatnick was there. He understood it, and he gets to go into the UFC Hall of Fame. Finally, the promotion that had in many ways turned its back on him is now recognizing him for what he's done. He was tremendous knowledge, highly respected, and was a wonderful voice for the sport. I thought, anyway, at the time, and I still do to this day, I believe he was a voice of reason for a sport that was just finding its underpinnings. Were you aware of the sport in its infancy? I believe you probably understood wrestling as many as do many wrestling wives, but did you understand the I think the cohesiveness between the two sports?
Yeah, somewhat. Yeah, in that respect, he would talk about when the shows would come up, or he'd be researching who's going to be up against each other, and he would always say, "Oh, the wrestler is going to win. It's always the wrestler. The wrestler is going to win," because they just had more of a mental toughness, I guess, more so, in his opinion. As opposed to a judo person or a kickboxer or a boxer. He would always joke around and say, oh, the wrestler's going to win this one, wrestler's going to win this one. So I always went with it. I trusted whatever he said. And, my son wrestled, since kindergarten through his freshman year in college. So I'm no stranger to wrestling. And actually, my daughter wrestled for 2 years, too. And then went to cheerleading, so that was kind of funny.
True wrestling family. I love that. But there's so much about life that can be learned on the mat, and the relationship of how you approach the mat, how you approach competition, and I think Jeff was a great example of that. But we thank him, and I think that the sport owes him a deep debt of gratitude, because he was there at the formation of the rules and what became unified rules for mixed martial arts. So he's going to be inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame, coming up with some great names, guys like Matt Hughes, wrestler, Frank Trigg, wrestler, and it seems to me to be an incredible feat that he's going in at the UFC Hall of Fame as it's newly revamped. How did they notify you, and what was your initial response?
I had someone by the name of Aunt Evans call me asking me just general questions about Jeff, and wanted to get some background for an article he was going to write on him. And then a couple days later, I got a phone call from Dana White, and he said that the reason why Aunt called me is because he just wanted to get a feel for what I was thinking and what kind of knowledge I had, and to informed me that they had decided to induct Jeff into the Hall of Fame for his contributions, back in the early years. And I was thrilled, because I think it's warranted and it's deserved and it's long awaited and it's the right thing. And they invited us to go out, me, my two kids, my son's 19, my daughter's 16. And so they invited us out to come accept that award. And I'm excited to go.
Oh, I'm very tickled pink for your family. Of course, I think everything you said is correct. It's not only warranted, it's not only earned, but it is the right thing to do. He'll go into the contributor wing of the UFC Hall of Fame, and of course, he's already a distinguished member of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame. Every time his name is mentioned, it's with a great deal of reverence that we talk about your husband. The memories, I'm sure, are probably still pretty sharp in some regards, but it's been what, a couple years now since we lost him, and
October 2012.
October 2012, and I know that it wasn't too long after that where you actually traveled to accept the State Chairman of the Year award from the USA Wrestling New York State Chapter, and it was at the USA versus Russia duel. And say it for me. What high school were you at?
Shenandoah.
Shenandoah High School in New York.
Yep.
And I would have said Shenandoah. I think I would have anyway. But that's a jury of his peers that selected him. In other words, it was people who respected him at the state level. It was people that selected him and recognized him for his efforts. Did you have any idea how special Jeff was to the sport?
He lived and breathed it from the moment I met him to the moment he died. Yes.
So, I mean, let's face it, if there was a favorite...
And in every facet of it, whether he was helping a club team, he was assistant coach at our local high school here where my son went. So he was assistant varsity coach for probably 8 years, coached a lot of those kids all the way up to the state championships. He was the commentator for NBC or ESPN for the NCAAs every year and NBC for the Olympics, and he always had his hand somewhere in the wrestling cookie jar.
I'm wondering if he didn't enjoy I mean, he had a tremendous impact on the Junior Olympic membership of the New York State and for uniting the efforts of the leadership of the New York USA Wrestling, which had gone through some tough times in previous years prior to his arrival, but it seems to me that he always had his eye on the benefit that it would provide kids. Why do you think that was?
Always.
What do you think that was?
I don't know. Maybe it goes back to his high school days that he was running cross country and playing basketball, and his high school coach, Joe Benna, approached him one day. I think he was a sophomore maybe, and he was sitting the bench on the basketball team, and Jeff was a big kid, and Joe was looking for a heavyweight wrestler and said, hey, come work out in our wrestling room. And Jeff's like, nah, I don't want to do that. And he's like, no, come check it out. Check it out. So he went to check it out, and he was an extremely competitive person, analytical, researched everything, would never stop trying something until he accomplished or succeeded at something, anything. And so he tried it, and within 2 years he was New York State champion and went on to Springfield College and was NCAA, I think, Division II, and it just goes on and on and on from there. But yeah, he, I think because of Joe Benna, Joe Benna had an impact on Jeff's life all the way to the end, and he was one of those coaches that did everything for the kids, and I think as Jeff's mentor, he wanted to give back. He would always help any kid in the wrestling room, and even if it was Pee-wee. I mean, he also helped with our Pee-wee program when my son was a Pee-wee, back in kindergarten, first grade, all the way up. He just wants to see a kid succeed, and he loves the sport, and he wants to keep it going. And, there was that one scare that the Olympic committee thought, that was one of the sports that they might get rid of in the Olympics, and it's the oldest Olympic sport. How could they do that? So,
right. Well, and how could they do that to Jeff? How could they do that to any of our wrestlers or coaches?
Any of the wrestlers, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, it was said, and I think Bill Crum said it, and pardon me if I'm wrong on this, but Jeff was the personification of giving back.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps that's the hallmark of the greatest of the best. You know what I'm saying? I think that that may be what I was attracted to in Jeff. In Jeff was that he was always giving back, wanting to make, as you said, kids better, give them an opportunity to recognize, their ability that perhaps that they didn't even know they had.
Yep. Yep. He was an asset, definitely, to our high school team. He brought his wealth of knowledge to them, and our current high school wrestling coach, Steve Jones, is awesome, and Jeff just helped him with it. Gave him his little tidbits here and there. He was the expert in wrestling, so he brought what he knew to the high school level, and our team succeeded throughout the whole time he was there. So. Plus, we had great wrestlers, too.
Well, I think at some point, a good wrestler that is well coached should turn into a great wrestler. Look at Tony Black. Those that, had so many nice things to say about him, knew him well. Tony Black, Alexis Porter, Jeff and Bill Crum. I mean, the names and the list goes on, but he has had an impact on so many. You talked about his days as a broadcaster. I truly believe that he loved presenting the sport to the wrestling fans and fans of sport in general. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. Every time he was on the NCAA's commentating, I'd have a house full of people, mostly wrestlers and a lot of friends, and we would spend the night watching it.
I love it. Lori Blatnick is our guest. She's in Burnt Hills, New York. We're in Des Moines, Iowa. This is Takedown. She's in the Nike hot seat today. And the reason why is because Jeff is finally getting the recognition he so richly deserves by the UFC. Of course, we remember back to October 24th of 2012 when Jeff died due to complications related to heart surgery. He's a Greco-Roman star to the '84 Olympic Games, an incredible feat accomplished just two years after being diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. He'll be going into the newly revamped UFC Hall of Fame with Frank Trigg and Matt Hughes, and I think he would see that as a great compliment. Of course, Matt Hughes, a wonderful Division II wrestler and an ultimate star with the UFC over many years. Frank Trigg, the same, but he wrestled for Oklahoma. So I think he would probably not see the division between these two as much between Division I and II or Oklahoma versus, Southern Illinois. I think he'd see a wrestler and another wrestler going into the Hall of Fame. I think he'd see it for the purity of what it was. He was a true fan and an exceedingly knowledgeable voice for the sport of wrestling, but becoming that for mixed martial arts. Lori Blatnick is going to be flying out to, and I believe it will take place in Las Vegas. What's the date? Is it on July 11th?
July 11th.
Okay, and you'll be taking your son and daughter.
Yes.
How special will this be for them? What are their thoughts when you told them that he was going to be going into the Hall of Fame?
The night I told my son, he had 4 of his high school buddies over. They're all home from college for the summer, and they've all hung out together since kindergarten, so they know Jeff as if he's a second father to them. So the 5 of them were in my kitchen, and I told them, and they all wanted to go. They were quoting names and all the different matches coming up, and then they immediately took out their phones and started, Googling who's going to be, at the International Fight Week, and they're like, oh, we want to go, and yeah, they were all super, super excited for Ian.
Did you have to call Dana back and say, I'm going to need like another 6 tickets?
Oh, I should have. You know what? I would take them all because they're all like my sons. We've gone on vacations together, and they were there to pick up Ian after everything happened. Ian was a senior in high school when Jeff died, so his buddies were right there for him.
Oh, my.
Good kids.
Lori, I congratulate you and your family. Surely we have our own fond memories of Jeff, but I first was notified of this in our press releases from the UFC, confirming it with the offices as well out in Las Vegas, and I was really gratified because I knew the backstory on the growth of the UFC, and there was a trip to England that Jeff didn't make that he should have made, and how it all came down. So I'm glad that they have not only come to their senses, but as you said earlier, done the right thing. He belongs there. He was at the very birth of the sport we now call mixed martial arts, and what a representative he's been for the sport of wrestling, not only prior to, but even in his passing. There is a bright light that shines and it's Jeff Blatnick, and I appreciate you talking to us about this today.
No, absolutely.
Congratulations. Best to your daughter, your son. We hope you enjoy the weekend as they celebrate, your late husband, and they celebrate all that he had to give, because she surely gave a lot.
Yes, he did. Thank you.
I'm Scott Casper. For Lori Blatnick, thanks for listening to this very special Nike Hot Seat interview. Jeff Blatnick going into the UFC Hall of Fame on the 11th of July, 2015. Thanks for listening.